Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rebecca Beasley. I'm a Senior Associate in the Healthcare team here at VWV Solicitors. On behalf of VWV and our co-host Cushman and Wakefield Surveyors, represented today by partner Sophia Sham, we'd like to thank you for joining us for our first virtual Future of Healthcare seminar. Today, we will hear about the importance of early diagnosis and investment in prevention of Alzheimer's disease and how Loveday & Co is leading the way in providing a new approach to dementia care. Now, without further ado, I will hand you over to Sophia Sham of Cushman Wakefield to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Rebecca. Before we start, I'd like to thank you all for attending, and a special thanks to both of our speakers for giving us their time today. We do have a lot of content to get through, so I'll press on and introduce the first speaker. She's the leading neuroradiologist with experience in both the NHS and private sector. Currently, she is the founder, CEO, and medical director of award-winning Mind and Brain Clinic Recognition Health, the fastest growing world-leading centre for clinical trials for Alzheimer's and dementia research. It comes as no surprise she was named as KPMG's Entrepreneur of the Year in 2016. I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Emma McSweeney.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. And thank you again for inviting me to this really great opportunity to talk about sorry, I just need to talk about prevention. Sorry, to talk about prevention, which I think really has to be the way forward in Alzheimer's disease. And I think this is probably really one of the key aspects of the future for healthcare. Okay, so I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because 25-30 minutes is quite a short time to discuss really what is really a very big and pressing topic. So just to start with, there have been a number of surveys that have been done, and we did one about 2 years ago. And this is looking at people aged 55 and over. And what is interesting is that adults aged 55 and over are actually more concerned about developing Alzheimer's disease than any other condition. So comparatively, if you look at cancer, it's about 26%. And if you look at heart disease, it's sort of like about 6% combined. So the majority of people, what they're worried about is developing Alzheimer's disease. And interestingly, despite that, only about 81% of people actually recognize the difficulty in recognizing the early symptoms. Most people know that, about 81% of people know that remembering recent events is very key, but they're unaware of most of the other symptoms that need to be recognized. The other really big problem that even in 2020, Alzheimer's disease is still the only leading cause of death that is still on the rise, and no treatment is available worldwide that can change the course of this disease. Compounding this further is the fact that diagnosis is very difficult, and actually sort of like for some years, there's been quite a delay in focusing research into this neuroprogressive disease. Fortunately, we've been catching up really very rapidly over the last few years, and now there have been big changes. And I think it's really fair to say that today there really is reason to be cautiously optimistic. So where is the medical focus? So actually the same as all diseases, and I think everyone's very sort of like up to sort of speed on this at the minute with COVID, but it's firstly being able to identify symptoms, and most importantly, recognizing these symptoms as early as possible. Having simple tests that can be used in a ubiquitous way to make a fast and accurate diagnosis. And for something like Alzheimer's, it also needs really very specific biomarkers for early and accurate diagnosis. And as we go through the presentation, I'll explain why this is so important. And then in addition to that, it's having the development of new treatments which are designed to actually slow or ideally halt progression of disease. So first, recognizing symptoms. As I said, I mean, most people are aware of short-term memory loss as being an early presenting finding, but actually it's all these aspects of cognitive impairment. And cognitive impairment is so difficult because basically it's just our thinking ability. It's abstract thought, calculation ability, visuospatial concentration, and then this big bag of sort of like executive function, which is planning, judgment, sort of like inhibition, problem solving, etc. And that not only are those symptoms a little bit sort of like nebulous, but the further problem is that those symptoms can actually herald the onset of a huge plethora of different diseases, from reversible conditions, sort of like anxiety, depression, traumatic brain injury, you know, like right through to maybe post-chemoradiotherapy changes. or Alzheimer's disease. Now, obviously, there are other factors that help to differentiate between all these different conditions. And to be honest, for Alzheimer's disease, the really big one is just that the biggest risk factor is age. So as you are older, it is more likely than not that it may be heralding Alzheimer's disease. The big thing as well that seems to cause a huge amount of confusion is the fact that people constantly, and even today, I have people coming to the clinic saying, I've got a diagnosis of dementia. There is no such thing. Dementia is not a diagnosis. It's a combination of symptoms. And what it is it's effectively the presence of progressive, slowly progressive cognitive impairment, which is in 2 or more domains. So that's like short-term memory, calculation ability, concentration, etc. It has to be progressive, and it needs to impact on activities of daily living. And activities of daily living means things like being able to go shopping independently, driving independently, manage your finances or house independently. Once you've lost that independence, then you come under this umbrella term of dementia. And under that umbrella are multiple conditions, as we've just seen in the last slide. But as I said, the most common of these as we grow older is Alzheimer's. And actually, for most of the time that people have Alzheimer's, they don't have dementia. And the future is really Alzheimer's disease, but not having dementia. And I'm going to explain just very briefly at a high level what causes Alzheimer's disease in an attempt to really explain why you can have Alzheimer's disease, but not have dementia. So in sort of like literally 2 minutes, it's obviously more complex than this, but the key thing really are there are 2 proteins. There's beta amyloid protein and there's tau protein. And very briefly, the beta amyloid protein gets effectively overproduced and can't get cleared quickly enough within the brain. And so it gets dumped down on top of the cognitive brain cells, and it stops those brain cells from working normally. Now, the way any cell in the body will respond if it can't work normally is it just sort of like shrivels up and dies. And you can see that if you break your arm and you have your arm in a cast, when you take it off, the muscle cells are all sort of thin and weedy. But muscle cells, like most cells in the body, can regenerate. And so as soon as you exercise, you do your rehab, the muscle cells come back. But the problem with brain cells is they don't regenerate. So we can't really afford to lose them. So the amyloid protein is destroying the brain cells by dumping itself down on top of them and stopping them working. The tau protein is different. That is inside the cognitive brain cells, and that stops the cognitive brain cells working by multiplying within the cognitive brain cell itself, such that in the end, the brain cell just bursts. It just sort of like ruptures, and that's the end of the brain cell. So these are really the sort of like 2 key processes that we have to stop or prevent or slow down in order to slow down the progression of Alzheimer's disease. So I've just shown you schematically here. On the left side, you've got the amyloid protein, APP. The A beta fragment is just broken off from the end of that. And as you can see at the far right-hand end is the clearance mechanism. And if the production increases and the clearance can't keep up with that, you'll get the accumulation of the amyloid plaque in the middle. And drugs can be designed to reduce production, to sort of like decrease the amount of aggregation to form the plaque, or to increase the amyloid clearance. And all of these will slow down the rate of neuronal loss caused by the amyloid plaque, which then is what causes the dementia. The tau protein, as I said, is inside the brain cell. It abnormally it takes an abnormal format, and then it starts to multiply in that format so that it builds up, it ruptures the brain cell, and then you're just left with something called a tau tangle. But more importantly, the tau protein can also jump from one brain cell to the next. So it's in one brain cell, and then it jumps across into the next brain cell across the synapse, and then it sort of like infects almost, it's like a virus, it infects the next brain cell, and then it goes on and on and on. So if you have 1 million brain cells affected, you'll suddenly have multiple millions of brain cells affected. And it spreads around the brain in a predictable fashion. And that's why the symptoms in Alzheimer's disease progress in a predictable fashion, because you're killing off more and more brain cells in a way that we know exactly how it spreads. Just suffice to say that, to be honest, in 2020, there are multiple other mechanisms as well. These are epigenetic, changing the genetic way in which the nerve cells and all the neurotransmitters work, deactivation of bacterial toxins, antiviral treatments, anti-inflammatory treatments. So very briefly, I'm just going to sort of explain in terms of like, you don't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. So I'm going to spend just 1 minute explaining how the current treatments work. So these are the treatments that are on the market at the minute and why they're so different from the new treatments. So the current treatments you'll be familiar with, they're sort of donepezil, galantamine, rivastigmine, and another one called memantine. And the way they work is they help the transmission of nerve impulse, which is effectively information or thoughts, from one brain cell to the next. And they do that using something called a neurotransmitter, represented here by these green dots. But the problem is that the neurotransmitter is released from the distal end, if you like, of the proximal brain cell. So if you now imagine you've got a background where the underlying amyloid tau and other processes are killing off these proximal brain cells, you're going to reduce your capability to produce this neurotransmitter or acetylcholine. So in the normal person, what's happening is when you're all fired up and you want to use all your brain cells, you've got masses of this neurotransmitter acetylcholine being produced. But when you want to sort of like chill down, relax your brain, you want to, again, get an equilibrium. And what happens is there's something called acetylcholine esterase, this little purple thing, and that absorbs your sort of like unwanted acetylcholine to sort of like calm the brain down. So if you think now of your brain as obviously having multiple gazillions of these brain cells, and you think of your brain as having a bath in which you want to have masses and masses of this neurotransmitter, the way that you can compensate for the fact that the production of the neurotransmitter is being reduced by the destruction of the brain cells by the amyloid and tau is by blocking the absorption of this precious neurotransmitter. And that little red sort of thing that fits into the purple thing and stops the neurotransmitters from being absorbed is actually the drug. They're called acetylcholine esterase inhibitors, and that is what donepezil, rivastigmine, galantamine are. So they work purely by trying to compensate for the death of the brain cells by saving your precious neurotransmitter. But there's a point at which if you haven't got enough brain cells producing it, then you sort of like, they don't work anymore. And that is exactly what happens with these drugs. So today, with these drugs alone, the death of the brain cells is unstoppable. And so if we look at what we want as a future model, which is basically Alzheimer's disease, but we don't get dementia, or ideally don't get any symptoms. On the right, if you can see here, you've got a brain on the left, which looks normal, and on the far right, sort of like down bottom corner, you've got an atrophic brain. Now, we don't wake up one morning with brain atrophy. This develops slowly. And so what happens is you start off with a normal brain, but you can see by that sort of like dark blue, you've got evidence of disease in the brain. That represents the abnormal proteins. And as they spread around the brain, you go from being normal to having mild cognitive impairment to eventually having dementia. And today's drugs, as I said, are sort of like working, maybe you've got mild cognitive impairment, maybe you've got early dementia, but they're working just to try to sort of like help those dying brain cells to work a bit better, work a bit more efficiently, but they're not going to stop the progression of disease. On the right, on the left-hand side, in the green corner, if you like, you've got the new medications, and they're working by stopping the brain cells from dying in the first place. And so it makes sense, you've got to give those drugs as early as possible to prevent you from sort of, if you like, going down that escalator to developing more and more disease. So what are the game changers? They're going to be these new generation treatments, which slow down or ideally halt progression of disease, but they have to be combined with new, very sensitive and sophisticated and affordable biomarkers to tell us we've got presence of disease. Now, this sort of graph just summarizes sort of like where we're at and where we're going. So on the x-axis, you've got sort of like mild cognitive impairment and dementia on the right side. And what I want you to look at just very briefly is the area under the curve. So if you just see your clinician and say, look, I think I'm a bit worried about my memory, that's the equivalent of that first brown line. And the number of people that the clinician can pick up and say, oh, yep, I think you've got Alzheimer's is quite high when you've actually got sort of like full-blown dementia. But when you've just got very mild cognitive symptoms, it's almost impossible to make an accurate diagnosis. The next line up, the sort of purple one, is sort of like detailed neuropsychology assessments. Next one up, the blue one, is doing CSF examination to look at amyloid and tau in the sort of like, oh, sorry, that's MRI. And actually, as you can see, a lot of people will have a completely normal MRI scan, even though they've got mild symptoms. Next line up is doing CSF analysis, looking at amyloid and tau proteins in the spinal fluid. The next one is looking at something called a PET scan, which looks at the sort of metabolic energy of the brain cells. And then the final top red one, that's something called an amyloid PET scan. And that now is identifying presence or absence of abnormally elevated amyloid protein in the brain. And what you can see is you can pretty much accurately diagnose the cause of the mild cognitive impairment, even when the symptoms are very, very mild, the left-hand end of that MCI bracket. And actually, you've now opened up a whole new arena left of that, where you've got people, it says preclinical, that basically means they're cognitively normal, but they've got high levels of this biomarker in their brain. So they're just waiting to progress across and develop symptoms. So it's obvious that that's in the future where you want to start giving treatment. And I just put this little circle on the right. This was a publication a few days ago saying that there's now a rapid blood test which is designed to pick up Alzheimer's disease. So something like that is going to potentially represent a huge breakthrough in biomarker technology. And in the interest of time, I'm really just going to sort of go to the bottom of this slide to say that the biomarkers are a game changer because they can pick up evidence of disease in the brain, actually probably anything up to about 20 years before the development of symptoms. And so the really big reason why this biomarker revolution is so important is because it basically changes the whole concept. So now the way for the future to think about Alzheimer's is a biological entity defined entirely by amyloid tau and other neurodegenerative biomarkers, irrespective of the presence of clinical symptoms or functional decline. So another way of looking at it is that we're all on this continuum. Okay, so it's a new paradigm really. So you're either on the left-hand end, you're normal and you don't have any abnormal biomarkers, you're normal and you've got a few biomarkers, or you've now crossed the midline and you've got mild cognitive symptoms and lots of biomarkers, all that color in the brain, or you've got dementia and you've got a brain full of biomarker or a brain full of disease. And the whole purpose of this for the future is to slow down the rate at which we cross that midline. So it doesn't matter really if you've got Alzheimer's disease if you haven't got any symptoms. So you want to stay on the left of the continuum. I've put this slide up for 2 seconds only just to say, because everybody asks about it, what about genetic risk? The answer is age is the biggest risk factor by far. About 3% of the population can have this ApoE4 gene, and they can carry two, one from each parent, and that does increase risk. Doesn't mean they're going to get the disease, it just increases risk. Or if they have one E4 gene, which is 25% of the population, that can also increase risk. And there probably will be other markers that we don't know about yet that will play into this. So another way of looking at it is we're all either normal, we've got mild cognitive impairment or dementia, and what determines whether, or the rate at which we will go up this graph in the green bit, if you like, is whether we've got lots of risk factors or very few risk factors. And that will determine the rate of progression, if you like. So why is early diagnosis important? Not only because it enables us to distinguish those diseases which present in the same way but may be reversible, such as depression or anxiety, but also improves our knowledge and our access to services. But particularly in 2020 and going forwards, it gives us the opportunity to get access to new generation treatments as soon as possible. And they are the chance to improve our future. And that, going back to what I was saying, it's all about early diagnosis and new effective treatments. I want to digress for a second just to say that it's not all about drugs. About 30% of risk factors for dementia due to Alzheimer's have now been demonstrated through big studies to be due to reversible or modifiable risk factors. So that means that about 30% of the disease in the population can be modified. And no surprise, these are the sort of like key risk factors. And it's easy to just remember what's good for your heart is good for your brain. But these are much more important than probably everyone has sort of like previously realized. So the point of the medications is really to sort of get now access to something that probably won't be on the market for maybe sort of like 3 to 5 years. I won't go through the details of clinical trials because there isn't really time. And I think most people will know the most important thing is every single drug on the market has to have gone through clinical trials, and that's there is no drug you've ever taken that hasn't gone through a clinical trial. And I think everyone's very aware of clinical trials at the minute because of the COVID vaccine. And suffice to say, there are multiple ongoing and new studies which we're doing at Recognition Health, but which are all across the world. And these are for mild cognitive impairment and for early Alzheimer's disease. This is just a graph to sort of show you, like, this is a global race. These people are getting onto these studies all across the world, and it's completely competitive. So if somebody over on the West Coast or somebody in the Far East is putting lots and lots of people into studies, it's fewer places for people in the UK. It is absolutely competitive. So if you are interested in learning more about the clinical trials and participating, then, as I said, now you sort of like understand the mechanisms. There's new medications against amyloid and tau protein, decreasing their production, increasing their clearance, and decreasing the damage that they cause. There's vaccines, there's anti-inflammatory meds, there's epigenetic medications, and there's some interesting new antitoxin medications. And nobody knows at the minute which one's going to be the best, and there probably will be several that will be effective. But it's you know, it's we'll get there in the end, as with every type of disease. So I sort of really just want to finish with saying that I hope you'll agree with me that there is evidence for being cautiously optimistic. And actually, I do think that the sort of like what we've been witnessing with the development of the COVID vaccine sort of shows that, you know, with the right amount of money, effort, expertise, focus, concentration, and everything else, I think we have the, I don't mean like we get recognition in the world, the scientists have the ability to find the cures to these diseases. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. We'll hopefully have some time for questions at the end, so please pop these in the box, the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to press on now. It's a pleasure to introduce our next speaker. In this context, he is the chairman and founder of Loveday & Co, a private members club for seniors and individuals with memory care needs. But he also holds a number of other positions, including Chancellor of the University of West London, where he has created a master's programme in dementia. He is also Global Ambassador and Chairman of the Alzheimer's Society Dementia Appeal Board. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Lawrence. But perhaps the most notable of all, he is the largest individual dementia care philanthropist in the country. Lawrence Geller, CBE, over to you.
Thanks very much, Sophie. Sophia and Emma, I'm always humbled when I'm in your presence, and I don't think anybody could have compressed as much knowledge into 25 minutes in the world as you just did. And so I really I appreciated it, and I always learn from you every time I hear anything. What I'd like to tell you today is that I am a complete neophyte in the world of dementia, but I'm passionate about it, and I'd like to tell you, sort of explain in a story what brought me, why we do, what motivates me, and what we're doing, because I do believe we're pioneering and innovating in this field. So I will talk about my beliefs, our plans, and what we think about. First of all, what drove me when I first got approached because of my interest in dementia, living a bicontinental existence then in the United States and here. I got approached to take on this chair of the National Dementia Appeal for the Alzheimer's Society. I knew skin deep, I guess, but by the time I started it, I realized that as a nation, we're getting older. 22% of people in this country are over 65. By 2030, 1 in 5 will be 65 or over. And in 50 years, which is when my grandkids will be in their 60s, there'll be an additional 9 million people in the UK of over 65. And that's the population of London. So it's a scary statistic about aging. It's reported, but I don't think it's really known, that 850,000 people in the UK are diagnosed with dementia. And by extrapolating that number in 2025, there'll be over 1 million, which will double again by 2050. It's fabled, but could well be true, that 1 in 3 people could contract dementia during their lifetime. And this always fatal disease, in one way or another, is really the world's biggest killer. By the way, when I realized that in the next 25 years, the UK will require approximately 200,000 more dementia care beds than exist today, I realized that I could help. And then, and a little bit what Emma was talking about, but I disagree with some of it. There are 4 times more dementia sufferers in the UK than cancer sufferers, but 4 times more is spent on cancer research than on dementia research, and practically nothing goes into research in dementia care. And that's what motivated me to do it. And when I was speaking to the government people, and they told me that over 26 billion annually annually is spent on dementia care, I thought perhaps I can do some good in my own small way. It is a global pandemic, and whereas I know that the drug companies have spent over $20 billion, pounds, I'm sorry, and written it off over the last number of years looking into dementia. Very few are focusing on it today. So I'm not particularly optimistic about breakthroughs other than in areas such as testing that Emma has been talking about, because there's simply not enough money and effort on it. Yes, we can cure, we've come up in the most astonishing thing, 10 years of work into less than a year to come up with vaccines, but look at the money and the government support behind it. And I'm a passionate advocate for money being spent on dementia, and I suspect that neither our Prime Minister nor our Chancellor of Exchequer really wants to hear from me again on this subject, because I'm a bore to them. But I am no doctor. I have no university degree. I've had no formal training in any healthcare. I'm a hotelier by trade. So you've got to judge my comments on my ignorance, but not my lack of passion. And I know there are many multiple different types of dementia and causes, and it's dementia is a word that's used and abused by so many. And obviously I'm passionate to see biomedical research continuing, but given that there's no cure in sight, I believed, and I still do believe, that research into care and the method of delivery care is an absolute essential answer to help ameliorate this problem, as is prevention, as Emma talks about, or putting it off. If we're to relieve the strain on our society and make lives better for our kids and my grandkids, while they care for their parents, I don't know if my kids will care for me, but that's another story. That's a mission that is worthy. To go back into one of my beliefs now, to start with beliefs, over the past decade, there's been an increasing shift of hospitality moving into many other fields of endeavors in our society. If you think about the malls, with all of the restaurants and entertainment, if you think about offices today with all the facilities, share space, co-working, gyms, everything else, the restaurants and a foodie society, it's really is hospitality is pervasive. So I felt passionately and fundamentally that the care industry has been neglected by hospitality. And I'll comment on one thing, and it's not a new belief, it's a belief I had in the 80s, and I'll comment in a moment. But I believed this, so I believe hospitality had to come in. Another belief was our elderly are shunted aside in society, and I hate it, and I'll fight it, and I think it's a disgrace and a terrible scar on society for it. I believe our elderly need to be venerated, respected, and treated with dignity they've earned, because it was their contributions that created the society that allow us to do whatever we do. And I think that those that ignore elderly, and I say it to people when I hear these comments, those that ignore our elderly or pay lip service to them are just one short step in time away from what will happen to them when they reach this age, and they will. And I will not ignore the elderly. By the way, I'm an ex-international rugby player, schoolboy rugby player, as Inga knows, and I'm chairman of a rugby charity that focuses on bringing deprived kids out of the wilderness into using rugby as a cure, and we do it all over the world. But because of what I believe in dementia and in vascular issues, I've become a pioneer, if you will, with the British Lions and groups like that. And we've been working to put together the right methodology for looking at dementia into rugby players. And I'm very proud of that work, and Emma is doing similar work, and we're hopefully cooperating on that. So what's my philosophy? First of all, I have to give you one last thing. My son went into the field of senior living in the United States a decade, two and a half decades ago. And he eventually was moved from the United States to the UK to take over a company called Sunrise, senior living company, where he's widely credited with having turned around a failing proposition and putting it in good enough health to be sold. So he is a mentor to me in this area, which is odd for a father to have his son as a mentor, but it's pretty proud. I'm pretty proud of it. But what we believe in, and Guy and I and me particularly, is not one size fits all for dementia sufferers. Everybody's an individual, and we need, and I defund it. You absolutely have to tailor a care plan for each person that's in your care, comes involved with dementia. And we believe that that families want and deserve to have their lives back. For so many of the families have to sacrifice so much to care at home for their loved ones. I also believe that it is a disgrace, and that's the right term, that we do not have a national accreditation system for dementia carers in this pandemic. So what's our mission? I wanted to set up to become the leading provider of self-pay. That's a fundamental differentiation, elderly care, and I'd have it supported by hospitality-driven services, facilities, amenities. And I really measure it by outcomes. And how do you measure outcomes in this area? Well, I'll give you some stories on it, but it's really quality of life, and that's really qualitative, not quantitative. And length of life after diagnosis of it. In other words, beating the diagnosis. And our goal is to make every day lived well for our members, our families, and our wonderful team members. And we've adopted a culture of above and beyond in every way, to exceed expectations in every way. By way of background, when I owned a number of Four Seasons hotels, that was the culture we put in there. You have to go above and beyond. You have to tailor every service to every individual person. Not easy to do, because it's easy to be complacent and stop improving, and we just won't be. We believe in investing in innovation in care, in any industry I've ever been in, but particularly in care. And by the way, most of my investments in innovation have fallen flat on their face. But if you stop trying, there's no success possible. We also learn from those failures, but we have no fear of trying. And the only thing I would be upset about my team is if they don't try, and then I'll support them every which way during and after, and do it when they do it again. We also don't believe, when you're dealing with the elderly, that you can accept anything mediocre. You have to care only about excellence. And for me, that means setting up a business in a nascent industry, which is at best a cottage industry with very little change since the mid-80s. We have to be best in class, because if we lead from the front, others will follow. And that's one of the reasons why I'll talk about education, why we share what we do as widely as we can. Okay, what's different about us? First of all, we don't like drugs. And this is probably where I fall apart with a number of my colleagues, and even probably with Emma. We think, and I've seen it with my own parents, both of whom passed away with comorbidities, but dementia was their fundamental downfall. We believe very much that you should not drug people to death, to quietness, to go into the good night quietly. We hate death, and we want to fight it, and we want to make lives well lived. So trying to decrease dependence on drugs is a fundamental of what we do, not to the point of stupidity, because we're guided by medicine and our medical team, but we don't believe it as an answer. We also believe heavily in nutrition. It won't surprise you to learn that I started my career as a chef, and I've always believed that nutrition can change outcomes. I saw it in sports, I saw it in the military when I was there, in all areas of endeavor. So we focus very, very hard on getting each person the right nutrition for their individual needs. And again, we don't believe one size fits all. So we've got to be for it. I'm amused. We've been in business about a year when we won an award for the best food in the care industry. And as I wrote back saying thank you, I commented how tragic it is, on how it is a scar on our society that somebody like me just coming in is giving the best food. What does it say about other people? Because I'm not satisfied with our food. And if you listen to my son, who runs 70 care homes, I would tell you, if he's talking truthfully, he doesn't really enjoy eating in his own care homes. So we believe in that. We believe in physical activity tailored to each person's abilities and needs. But equally, we believe in enforcing mental stimulation. And again, it's taking the time to assess people's backgrounds, history, everything about it, to find out what it is that stimulates them. Because if you can do that, and you mix it with the right drug balance, nutrition, physical activity, you can stimulate them mentally, and then put in interaction one way or another with companionship. The tragedy of having people in our society for this lockdown cut off from personal interaction is beyond belief. The tragedy of them not having any interaction at all, no phone calls, no anything, for days on ends, is a killer in my mind. And it just goes to the stoicness of society that they've survived. So those are the things we've done. And let me tell you some outcomes. We opened in the end of October 2016, our first property in Chelsea. Of the first 3 residents came in, the story was the same on 2 of them. Mum has got 3 months to live, perhaps 6 months. She needs more attention, nursing attention, that we can give her, but she'll only be around for 3 to 6 months. And that was endorsed not just by families, but by the doctors, their own doctors. We had one wonderfully well-known lady who was amongst that cohort of 3, Baroness Trumpington, who really, a famous lady who had difficulty in all parts of her life, from cognitive to physical to continence issues. And her son, I remember him talking about, are we able to provide care through death? Well, that was in November when she came in. By February, she is a famous complainer. She started to complain. Her son took her to Ascot in the summer. And in late October, 1 year to the day after she came to us, she stood up in the House of Lords and gave her resignation speech. She died 2 years and 3 months into it at a wonderful age. And so Jean is a perfect example of how to change her life. And she lived a life, wonderful life with us, with a new group of friends, and they created their own society. Of those 3 people, they're all alive, except for Jean. The last 2 are alive. And Miss Mary, who was the second one, came in, is 102 today and still going strong. So I think that's a differential, because you can see I'm passionate about it. Curious enough, in my hotel background, I was running a company called Hyatt Hotels in Chicago in the late 80s. And by then we'd been focusing on how we could spread our branding into other companies, other businesses. And obviously the dynamics of the elderly and the demographics were such that it became a compelling thing to be an innovator and be the first person to use a branded concept in senior living, which we were. So we formed a company called Classic Residence by Hyatt, and with the idea of driving hospitality into care. And it's still going today in the States. It's a company called VVI Senior Living, and very, very successful, based on the same precepts. At the University of West London, I mentioned I was a chef, and I had done some part-time training and courses there when it was a technical college. It morphed into a university, and somehow in 2010, I was asked to become Chancellor by the Privy Councillor, which I did, and it's been a turnaround story. But one of the conditions I had, because they had nursing and a hospitality school, was that I wanted to be able to fund a master's degree in dementia care, because I believed in it, and 2, I wanted to do research into dementia care, which I believed in at the time. And that's been a very, very big deal for us, because it's allowed a university in the heart of London to be present at all of our successes and failures, catalogue them, understand them, and report them and share our ups and downs. So it really is something that was different from other people to be such an open book, because the industry hasn't changed since I started Classic Resonance by Heart in the 80s. It just hasn't changed very much at all. And it's a shame, because every other industry has evolved with the speed of summer lightning, especially using technology. So if we could, my son and I believed, if we could demonstrate that there was a different but commercial way of helping those with dementia, we could set an example and people could learn from us and modify what we did to suit their own concepts and designs. We believed that the current ratio of carers, and I'm very careful to use that term, carers to residents, in most of the upper mid-market care homes you see around the country today is one carer to every 7 or 9 residents. We didn't believe that you could possibly give personalized care at that level. So we had to gamble and invest in having one carer for every 2 residents. And that's still what we do today. And it had attendant cost implications, and the gamble was we could get enough fees on that, and I'll talk about that when I finish up, to do it. Obviously, we've been very successful in not only providing the values to the service, but giving value, because we have a long waiting list to get in. Sophia mentioned philanthropy. Even when we had not a dime in my family, we've always given back. It was imbued in us when I was growing up as a kid in London. And since I started in the industry, I always have felt in any industry, the hotel industry, when I was 15, I always felt you had to give back somehow. So we believe fundamentally in the 3 W's of giving, which are work, wisdom, and wealth, and doing all 3 of them if we're to make a difference. So that's why I've given away so much, almost to the point of putting myself into difficulties in times for it. My wife and I, my eldest daughter was born with a serious heart complaint. So my wife and I became passionate when we were starting out about children's causes, heavy supporters of Great Ormond Street, but mainly in the States we gave a lot. But when my parents started going downhill, despite my refusal initially to recognize the symptoms, we started getting involved with the elderly. And I've seen the emphasis on research into cure or prevention, but I really became wanted to lead and pioneer by putting money into dementia care. And I didn't really just want to be a person that made a few quid off the elderly, which is so many of the care home developers are today, or operators. The result was simple. CQC earlier this year, February, I think it is, gave us outstanding, and remember we opened really, our first full year was 2017, gave us outstanding in 4 or 5 categories, and told us that we are in the top half of 1% of all care homes in the United Kingdom. And you know, we're the best care home, best nutrition, best small business in Kensington, Chelsea. That's not braggadocio or pride. It shows you that you have to work hard to be the best, because mediocrity doesn't win you a prize and doesn't solve it. Look, staff recruitment was a big issue to us. I was shocked that the national care industry retention rates for staff are even worse than for hotel people. And they're at about 50% annually. So we wanted to be better than that. And we lose only about 10% of our staff a year. So we're a 90% retention rate, which is really putting us amongst the best in London. And we do that because we care about people, and we invest in them. We do the training, we do the recruitment, we give the right conditions. We give them career development. We believe in it. It's not just trying to get somebody at 50 pence an hour less to line our pockets. We believe if we can give the right value and the right service, people will pay more. So today we've got the University of West London forms a big part of it. We've got there's the College of Nursing, Midwifery and Healthcare. There's now the London Geller College of Hospitality and Tourism, which is the leading hospitality and tourism college in London. There's the master's degree in dementia care. That was a first. And as of a month or so ago, they announced their School of Biomedical Sciences, but at the same time, they announced the newly launched Geller Institute of Aging and Memory, which we've already attracted three, I think, national research grants into dementia care, and it's also researching the much needed national accreditation scheme. I also co-founded the Westmont Innovation Hub, which we segregated specific grants into dementia care. We believe in having relationships with all of the other care offerers, as well as care organizations and charities. We're heavily involved with the Royal Hospital in Chelsea, which has a 27-bed dementia ward, and we are heavily supporters of them. We interact with them, we share services, facilities, and we do some really fun stuff together. And it's a joy to see see how it works. It really is wonderful. Obviously, we work with national dementia bodies. Finally, we're underway with a fairly significant growth plan. In 2021, we'll open 3 new properties in Kensington, Notting Hill, and St John's Wood Abbey Road. And a year later, 18 months later probably, we'll open in Belgravia. So it's putting our money where our mouth is. We're getting high rates, so it's an expensive game for people, but the lessons can be translated down the scale to less expensive things. So we are clearly the most expensive offerer in the United Kingdom. And that's why we believe in doing it small in boutique size, not in big size. So we can drive those rates that can give us the service, that can help contribute to research, that can go into philanthropy. So that's my story. It feels like I've been speed talking, but you know, if you're going to do it, you've got to do it right. And there is no room for mediocrity when it comes to the dignity and the health of the elderly. Thank you.
Thanks, Lawrence, and thanks, Emma. Thanks to all of our speakers today. Really fantastic session. So we do still have a few minutes. So if anybody does have any questions, please pop those into the Q&A box. But just again, obviously a massive thanks to everybody for tuning in today. Thanks to all of our speakers. And just a reminder that you will receive a copy of the recording and the slides, which Emma shared with you earlier, and we'll send those out via an email, and you should get that in the next couple of days. So there's no questions that have come in, but obviously if anybody thinks of anything afterwards, please do drop the events team an email, and we'll try to circulate that to the speakers as quickly as we possibly can. So that's everything from us. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.